This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, and that has links to, well, everything. Social media, Facebook page. Well, that's social media, I guess, isn't it? It has links to my social media accounts, my columns, my other podcasts, my photography website. You can sign up for my newsletter. You can send me an email if you'd like from there, and just drop me a line if you want to hear something on the podcast or have a comment or suggestion or whatever. Just want to say hi. I'll let people just write me and say hi. That's fine. All that stuff is found at hikingbob.com, so check that out. With me today is my co-host, Wild Westendorf.
Hey everyone, Wild Westendorf here, and you can find me on my website, wildwestendorf.com, and on Facebook and Instagram at Wild Westendorf.
Perfect. And just a couple of updates, Kevin. We ran at, we talked about the issue with Old Stage Road.
Yeah.
And you know, we talked about and acknowledged that the people who live up there have a justifiable concern for their safety, and really pointing the finger mostly at the El Paso County Sheriff's Office for just not doing their job up there. The people up there will tell you they feel abandoned by them. Never heard anything from the Sheriff's Office. I'm not surprised. If they don't care, they're not going to care about giving me an answer or anything. And one of the things we pointed out was that the Forest Service had like one full-time year-round law enforcement officer for this entire region. Well, the good news is, and I found this out, since we recorded that podcast and aired it, was they now have an additional full-time year-round law enforcement officer for this area. So they've effectively doubled their presence. But if it doesn't sound like much going from 1 to 2, it is actually a significant improvement in what's been available for law enforcement for the U.S. Forest Service for this area. They've also added we have the district ranger position, which is Carl Bauer. He replaced Oscar Martinez, who'd been the ranger here for a number of years. Carl came in a couple months ago, and I did meet him finally, and I'm working on getting him on the podcast, and we'll chat. I don't want to bring him right in because I want to have him have a chance to settle in his position and kind of get familiar with things. So when I ask him a question, he can actually have an answer.
It makes sense.
It doesn't make sense to say, hey, come on my podcast and talk about things about a district you haven't been in before. It's just not fair. But in any case, it's been a concern about a lot of people in the outdoor recreation arena here that there was just not enough people in this district, given the size of the district and the number of people that live near the district. 500,000 people just live here, millions visit it. Well, they've also now apparently have appointed an assistant district ranger. So now the district ranger doesn't have to handle everything.
Oh, okay.
Now, there's other staff who are assigned a number of different things, recreation and conservation, all kinds of different things. But now there's an assistant ranger for this district. So, again, that's going to help. And for people who don't know, a ranger in the Forest Service is not the same thing as in the Park Service or anything like that. The ranger is actually the person in charge of a specific district within a national forest. So it's not like not like somebody out there in the Smokey Bear hat, running around writing tickets and things like that. It's a different thing. But in any case, we have a ranger who's in charge of the Pike National Forest and the Pikes Peak Ranger District, which is where Colorado Springs falls, and most of everything you can see from here. And now we have an assistant ranger for the Pikes Peak Ranger District within the Pike National Forest. So a couple of things have started to improve with the Forest Service. I don't know what finally got Washington moving, but whatever it took, I hope they continue to recognize that there are some challenges here, and they haven't been addressed, and they need to be addressed. Now, if we can only get El Paso County to get on the stick and recognize that they're kind of failing in some areas in regards to law enforcement, that'd be a plus too. And we'll continue to, kind of press them on that topic. And, if you're wondering why this applies to you, well, and how that applies to outdoor recreation, in response to things not being taken care of, there's a proposal of many, I should be fair to that, it's not the jumping off point, that they close that road. And, you're just not going to be able to go up there. And I understand that will stop a lot of the people who are doing bad things from doing things, but it'll also stop people who are using that road as a transportation lane and who may want to get an early start on a climb or a hike or a backpacking trip. You're not going to be able to do that if they close the road. So we're trying to find a way to stop them from closing the road. And it all boils down to there's an issue with people up there behaving poorly, especially at night. And instead of law enforcement, by way of the sheriff's office, stepping up, the answer is to shut down the road. And you and I don't like that. However, I will say that I sympathize greatly with the people who live up there and having to deal with a lot of bad stuff. So I'm not faulting them. This is not a NIMBY, not in my backyard type of thing. They're not like they just want to be able to live their lives in peace. And I am completely on board with that. And everybody who attended that public meeting that I attended, we talked about, were completely on board. Even people who don't like the idea of a gate understood where those folks are coming from, and all would rather see other solutions, mostly in the venue of increased law enforcement, to address it. Anyway, I don't want to belabor that point. We have a lot to talk about, but I just wanted to talk about that. And just those are some developments that have come up since then. But the big thing we want to talk about is Kevin did a pretty epic hike, one that's been on my bucket list for years, and it just keeps slipping off, and I don't know why. And now Kevin's done it, and well, I can't let him beat me. I got to do it. But in any case, you did a hike to the old Skagway power plant.
Yep.
Which I understand is a pretty impressive site.
Oh, it is very impressive, yeah.
You made it there. You actually got a chance to do it. And from here, Kevin, I'm just going to let you tell the story of what it's like to hike to that power plant.
Okay, well,
start up. I'm sorry.
Oh no,
I'm going to let you start off. I'm going to let you tell us the story about that. But start off with how to get there.
Okay,
and then take it from there.
So the trailhead starts at unofficial trailhead, and it's completely legal to hike here. We did call a forest ranger to confirm it, because it's always kind of iffy if there's no official trail. And I just wanted to make sure this was not one of many trails on all trails and such to say like, oh yeah, this is great, and then you get there and you find out it's on private land or, but the trailhead starts at Skagway Reservoir, which is I'd say a few miles southwest of Victor. And if you haven't been to that area, Victor is a very, very small town. It's very cute. I mean, it's just a cute mining town, but it's also like half of a ghost town too. So yeah, the trailhead starts there. So I would say from where I live on the west side to the trailhead, it's about a solid hour drive. And if you don't know where Victor is, it's really close to Cripple Creek. But yeah, so the Skagway Power Plant is a power plant that was built between 1899 and 1901. Basically on the side of a canyon wall. The unique thing about this is that they actually didn't build any roadways to that location, because it just would have been extremely expensive even back in those days. So what they did was actually create a cart system that went up and down the side of the canyon that would transport materials, food, people, kind of like what I believe the incline was when that was first built. I'm not sure if that was always a tourist attraction as it was in its later years, but they would use this little rail car thing to bring everything down to build the power plant. But because it's in such a remote location, they also built a few homes around the power plant for the workers to live in. And every photo that I saw of the plant, of the buildings, it looks very small. So a part of me was hesitant to do this hike too, because it's like, man, it's a bit of a challenge of a hike since there's no actual trail. I don't want to go up to just a building and it's small, and it's like, okay, fine. The plant itself is massive. It is much, much, much larger than it looked like in the photos. And the homes are in remarkably great condition too. I still was on the safe side, and I didn't go walking inside the homes because you never know the condition of the flooring. And these homes did have basements, so I just didn't want to fall through the floor. But the power plant itself was also a community hub, because there weren't a lot of folks up there, but they made it their home. So the plant housed a saloon, a dance hall, and a few other things too. So folks can just go there when they're done with their shit, walk a few steps and sit at the bar and then have their wives and kids over and dance the night away. Then eventually in 1965, there were 15 days of rain, of continuous rain, which caused the Skagway Reservoir to overfill, which then caused a ton of flooding, and it destroyed the majority of the village.
So that was in 1965?
Yeah.
But the power plant had long been shut down by then, right?
No. It was shut down in 65.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
it was still running at the time.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, it's all good. And the damage was extensive enough to not make it worth the cost to fix everything. Plus, at this point, hydroelectric plants were kind of fading away in favor of coal and gas and all that stuff. So they abandoned the place, and then over the years, thieves have taken what they can. But since there's no roadway, and it's 5+ miles to one way, so a lot of stuff just got left there. And you can actually look in one of the homes, and there's still like the 50s era appliances like stove and refrigerator, which is really cool. It made me think of I Love Lucy and stuff.
I'm guessing avocado green color.
It may have been at one point.
That was actually more like, well, that was about the 60s. I vaguely remember avocado green and this really ugly,
I forgot about
shiny
that.
brown color stuff.
Yeah, and then like yellow, like pastel yellow.
Yellow was a popular
Yeah.
back in those days. Yeah, I'm showing my age by remembering that stuff. But I was not old enough to buy it on my own, so I'm not that old. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So that's a description of the plant itself. It has a wide but short history of living and life there. So the trail the hike itself starts off fairly well. I would say the first 2 miles, if you just want to go for a nice walk, it's fairly flat. It's very pretty. And then as you get further into Beaver Canyon, and the creek that runs through is Beaver Creek, which you probably know that name from the few times I've hiked in the Beaver Creek State Wilderness Study area. And
It's a combination of a state wildlife area and a federal wilderness
Yes.
study area. So it's combined. And you and I both hiked in there at separate times. But we come in from way down south from there.
Yeah.
A long way south of there.
There's actually a sign at the trailhead saying like to be really careful if you attempt to get to Beaver Creek State Wildlife Area from Skagway, because one way is 10.5 miles. Please allow for several days of backpacking, etc., which I would like to try someday. Also, this sign said that there's no trail. So yeah, so the first 2 miles or so, it's fairly easy. There is a well-worn social trail. But once you get deeper into Beaver Canyon, that's when it's very easy to lose the trail, or a social trail, some kind of sign of where to go. So we actually ended up crossing the creek 8 times, but we didn't need to cross it 3 of those times, because there's a bunch of times where we would cross the creek, get to a dead end, because there'd be a social trail. So we're like, oh, okay, we go here, cross the creek, hit a dead end, then have to go like 100 feet back and try another way. Like, oh, okay, we have to cross the creek again to get back. And it was frustrating.
Tell me about these crossings real quick. Are they a narrow and a rock hop, or are you actually wading through the water, or how wide are we talking about for these creek crossings?
They're pretty shallow, but they are wide. Most of them I was able to rock hop, and throughout the years, folks had laid down dead trees to kind of create a bridge. But the first time I crossed, I slipped off the tree, and my right leg went right in, or my left leg, went right into the creek, which I would later realize I definitely pulled a muscle or something, because I'm still feeling it a week later. And it made me mad because once I realized we didn't need to cross that creek, and it's like I fell into the creek for nothing.
When you talk about wide, you're talking 20 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet wide? How wide are you talking?
I would say most of the crossings are about 15 feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not super wide or anything like that.
And it was shallow. I'm sure in the springtime it's roaring and a lot deeper. And plus, I have had friends say that they went like in late spring or early summer, and crossing the creeks were a huge pain because the water was flowing much faster. It's a lot deeper. So keep that in mind.
And it's cold.
Yes, it's very, especially at that time of the year.
Right.
So that's what made it very time consuming, because I was actually wanting to make it back in town to record a podcast with you last week. And I was thinking like, oh, it's 11 something miles. It'll be fine. I've got enough time. that's when there's already a trail and you're not constantly spending a ton of time trying to route find, and you're not retracing your steps and going back, because on the hike back you think we'd be more familiar, but I forget when you're coming back on an out and back trail, it just looks different. And so unless if there's a defined trail, like we had to do the route finding all over again in many areas. It does get easier as you get closer to the power plant, because that's when the canyon itself gets very narrow. So it's not as spread out. So it's much more like, okay, it's clear, we just go here.
There's one way to go.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And we did make the mistake of crossing the creek the final time, and we crossed it in the wrong direction. So we ended up in an area to where we could see the power plant in the building, but it's kind of up on this little hill in the canyon, so we could see no other way to get up there. So I thought, okay, so we'll have to climb up this scree field, but the scree field is full of old metal and glass, and I was like, I was trying to remember the last time I got a tetanus shot. It's just kind of like, it was scary.
Plus, with the research you did on it, I'm sure you did a lot of research. Somebody would have said, by the way, you're going to love climbing up the scree field, and you didn't read anything about that.
Anything about that,
yeah. So that's the thing you remember when you're faced with something like that. Think to yourself, nobody mentioned this in the previous anything I read, so this is probably the wrong way to go.
So I eventually found at the end of the scree field, it looked like it was mostly dirt and rocks. So we went up that way, got to the top, and I looked to my right and I see where the trail up is. I was like, darn it.
That happens a lot.
Yeah, and it turned out we crossed the creek going the wrong direction, where we went left. Didn't realize if we went right, that would connect to the little trail that goes up that's much safer. Plus, the canyon itself is beautiful. It's like you have these massive rock walls around you. Like, it's gorgeous. And then the power plant itself is in remarkably great shape because it's all bricks, and a lot of the turbines are still together. They're not like torn apart. I'm sure they were full of copper and a bunch of other stuff that's been long gone. And there's old lockers. There's homes still had the old appliances. Like I mentioned earlier, there's two of them still had its wallpaper is still up. I mean, it's just a little bit of weather staining, and that's about it.
So, I mean, these houses, they still have roofs on them, or are the roofs gone? Really? So they're still largely intact, I guess. I'm guessing doors are missing and windows are out and stuff like that, but there's still a roof on them and everything.
There's one where a big tree had fallen on the roof, so that's a damaged roof, but
understandable.
You can tell that buildings were remarkably well built to be really sturdy and to survive decades, like half a century of neglect and the elements and all that, and to still be standing. And would definitely, if you're safe around the floors, I'm like, it's clear it'd be great shelter, or if you test out the floor, it'd be a great spot to set up camp if you wanted to. I probably still wouldn't, because I wouldn't want the roof to like cave in on me, like, because you don't know. Yeah, I was just extremely impressed. There's an area where that was the garden. It was a local garden where they grew a bunch of stuff. And in the middle of that garden area is this huge fir tree. I mean, it's massive. I mean, you can tell it's been there for a very long time. Largely, it wasn't just the buildings. There was like tent villages around too, to house more of the workers, because I'm assuming the buildings were like belong to the managers and higher ups.
Well, it's probably like a company town too.
Yeah,
so if you live there, you work there, and you had a house in lieu of some measure of wages or something like that, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah. So the whole area is just packed with history. You can tell that some people have taken loose bricks to build fire rings, and we ran into a few other hikers, but it was largely a quiet hike, and I don't understand what made them pick this specific location instead of just building the plant up at the reservoir. But I do know that it provided power both to Victor and Canyon City, so I think it may have had to just been a halfway point. At the top of the canyon, on the side of the wall that the buildings are on, there is an old dirt road. I'm not sure if you can get to it or if it's closed or what, but that's they would bring the trucks with all the equipment. There's these super tall like electric poles. I don't know how they got those down there, or if they just happened to find trees that were really huge and cut those down and debark them and all that, and then set those up. It's one of those things where human engineering, you're so used to it these days with these giant massive tractors and and equipment where they didn't have that back then. So it's like, how did they get this stuff here?
Right.
Even with the rail car, it reminded me of when we went to Oil Creek Tunnel. It's just trying to figure out how they got all those like tens of thousands of pounds of steel equipment down or up the mountain.
No, like that big steam engine. Oh, the remnants, that big steam engine that's there,
Yeah.
and the parts you see on the way down.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of it came down in pieces and then it was assembled on site. But those individual pieces, are still weigh thousands of pounds. I mean, it's pure solid steel. So I have no idea. It's impressive.
And that's back in the day when metallurgy was a little different, for lack of a better word, that the only way you made things stronger was just to make them heavier.
Yep.
You didn't, they probably weren't making things out of titanium and everything was made out of cast iron. And, well, it needs to be stronger. Well, let's make the cast iron even thicker.
Yep.
Let's make it heavier and thicker and stuff like that. So things weren't necessarily huge. So how many buildings do you think are down there?
That are still standing. I counted 5, including the power plant. But in old photos, you can tell there's a lot more. But those were more like shacks and tents and stuff. And the workers even had their kids there with them. So when you walk down the trail a little bit that we missed the first time, that we should have gone up, there's a playground set.
So maybe a school there at one time?
Yeah, it's kind of creepy because at this point it's kind of like in the middle of the woods. Because you're far enough away from the building, and then if you go a bit further down, there's an outhouse, which I did not try to investigate. That I don't want to know what beneath that floor, but yeah, like so you don't see the outhouse or the building, but you see this playground set in the middle of the woods, and it's all rusted and everything, obviously. And it's kind of like, man, if I didn't know about all these other things, I would find that really creepy.
It'd be kind of like Blair Witch Project-ish or something like that.
Yep, exactly.
So, Kevin, I think, you were asking about why they built it like not at the dam. I'm thinking that's probably where two things came into effect, where the water flow coming down the canyon was enough to spin the turbines, and then there's also a place where they could squeeze this thing in here. Although it sounds like it was still no easy feat of engineering to get that done. But you said it was also up on a hill or something like that?
Yeah, it's basically on a flat surface. It's a hill. I'm not sure if there's an artificially built hill or on the side of the canyon wall. And it's about, from the edge of the top, it's about 50 feet if I guess to the creek. So I'm not sure if the creek was much higher at one point or if they had a system, because what it looks like from the power plant going down the side of the hill into the creek, it looked like there was something there. And all that's left are concrete barriers.
My guess would be probably the building was where the actual electrical generating stuff was. And then in the creek itself would be the blade, so to speak, that the water would hit.
Okay.
And spin it. So I'm thinking that's probably why that one building was up there, because that's actually where the turbines actually were. But down in the water, the concrete things you saw was probably, they channel the water in because you increase velocity by narrowing the orifice it goes through, so you spin them faster. I'd studied a little bit of this stuff when I was a firefighter, so I kind of know how it's kind of like how pumps work and stuff like that. So I'm guessing that's why that building was up there a little bit. And plus, keep the electrical stuff out of the water, so they moved it up a hill a little bit. It's like they planned it pretty well. Yeah.
And to clarify, the majority of the damage from the flooding, I believe, was to that equipment that went from the creek to the building.
Was there like a rock slide that went with it? Did it bring rocks and stuff down? Like we've seen flooding around here after fires, and it brings rocks and trees and all that other stuff down.
That may have been it.
Okay.
Because it's clear stuff was washed away, but the buildings themselves were, like I said, still in great shape. Plus, I would imagine a lot of the shacks that were around the area, the large tent type things that I saw in the photos probably got washed away too.
Okay. So you hike down to this. And it's about 5-ish miles one way?
Yeah, I would say like 5.25 miles.
So obviously it's uphill to go back up. How steep are we talking?
It's an elevation gain of 1,400 feet, so it's not terrible.
And that's probably over about 3 miles, right? Because you said the first couple of miles are pretty easy, then...
And then you go down. And I always forget about these hikes where you start the hike by going downhill and then you end the hike by going back up.
Don't forget you got to come up.
Even if there's not a lot of incline, it's after 5+ miles, your legs are starting to get a little tired, even if it's downhill. And then now you're going uphill instead of getting that relaxing hike going downhill to finish it. It's the other way around. So your legs are starting to get a little tired. And then now you're going uphill. But it's not a terrible climb. It's just, as I mentioned before, it's the route finding that slowed us down a lot.
And for people who are wondering, in the national forest, typically, unless it's signed otherwise, it's fine. It's not a violation of any rules or anything to just bushwhack wherever you want to go. So, nobody wants to see illegal trails being built, but this is a social trail. It's been there for probably a bazillion years. And so, we're not violating anything by Kevin talking about taking the social trail down to, where this is or anything like that. It's perfectly legit to do that. And the reason why, like, you're not going to find this on Cotrex or a lot of maps because it's not an official trail. So it doesn't have a Forest Service number attached to it, what they call a system trail. So you're not going to find that on there. So you'll have to, find your own way there.
Along the way, there are remains of horse bridges. I didn't realize that's what those were, but then after the hike, I looked it up, and horse bridges were a very common thing to build to remote sites like this, where it was too expensive to build a road, so they would carve out a very narrow path and make bridges over the creeks for the horses to come through and bring supplies and such. And you can still see the remains of some of them. They've all collapsed, but I was seeing wood that was like, this is clearly like hand carved or cut, not a natural like dead tree or something, which was cool to learn, like was a common thing back in the mining days.
So basically, when you told me, well, I'll be around to do the podcast, but I'm going to do the Skagway, I'm going, boy, Kevin's really good, but that's a long way and a long drive. But it doesn't matter. We were able to take care of it. So other than some elevation gain, how was the hike out? The hike out was pretty good.
Oh, it was great. Like I said, you're still doing a lot of route finding, but once we got to the final 2 miles or so, like it's back up on that flat area, and it was fine to hike that.
So you got a little bit of a break before you actually get back in the cars. Cause one of the things that's tough to do is after you do a hard hike, whether it's a lot of uphill or anything, is you get back in your car and all of a sudden everything just wants to cramp up and seize up on you. And you think that'd be relaxing, but it's not, because now everything is just dumping, I guess. I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but I don't like doing a hike where you start off and you're going right uphill. I did Catamount Falls last week. It's like, oh, let's start it, and it's like uphill right away. And it's only for like a mile. What's it, 2 miles maybe? Not even 2 miles. But it's just like, and there's actually a physiological thing about starting off a hike going uphill. I've done the research on it. Somebody's done the research. I found the research. But there's actually a physiological thing that it actually is harder on your system when you start out going uphill. It's why if you're in an office building and you run up the steps and you're really fit, you still get tired running up 2 flights of steps because you're starting off running uphill. At least on this one, though, the hike you're talking about, the uphill wasn't that terrible. Was there any switchbacks, or was it pretty much just straight up?
Nope, it's straight down and up in the canyon.
I'm guessing since it's in a canyon, pretty rocky trail, pretty solid.
It's pretty solid, but there's a lot of scrambling over boulders and fallen trees. So I was definitely sore in my upper body because I use my arms way more than a normal hike where I hold my phone when I take a picture with my arms. I'm not like trying to grab onto rocks and balance and scramble and
Well, Kevin's an Instagram king, so it sounds like a fun hike. I'd need to do this. The time may be running out. We're hitting in the winter, so and not so much because of weather, but just because of available hours of daylight. We're going to be hitting the end of daylight savings time pretty soon. So the amount of daylight we have will be running out. It doesn't sound like a hike you want to do early in the year either because of, like you talked about, the creek crossing. So late summer, late fall, this time of the year kind of thing, September, October-ish.
And the time that I went was perfect for fall colors. It was clear, like it was probably a week past the peak, but it was still beautiful out there. Mm-hmm. And a part of me would love to see a group get together and raise funding to build an actual trail. But a part of me found the exploration aspect of it and the route finding, the guesswork and stuff. You're constantly looking at the map and you're trying to compare. I found that to make it so much more fun. I mean, most of my hikes are fun, but that was the most fun I've had on a hike in a while.
Right. Well, remember, it gets back to what we talked about with the Forest Service and getting them to approve something like that. And I will tell you that they're not in the mood. And they're at capacity. We've talked about this a lot, about the capacity issues that the local ranger district has, and being able to find the time and the people and do you, if you build a formal trail, you increase the number of people going there. Is that really something you want to do? Or do you want to purposely, I shouldn't say purposely, but may rather benignly leave the trail more difficult so you don't have as many people going there?
And I would also think that would help discourage people from taking stuff from the power plant and stuff.
There you go. And what's the ownership of the plant? I guess, who owns? Does anybody own it anymore? Or they just become?
I don't know, because I would assume it'd be trespassing on private land if they still owned it.
Mm-hmm.
But I confirmed,
no signs or anything?
Nope. And I did confirm with the ranger that I spoke to see, like, hey, is it fine to hike to the power plant, and like, is it fine to go inside of it? And she was like, yeah, that's
okay,
totally fine. Just be careful, like.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. You can go there, but you're on your own.
Yeah.
Okay. It sounds like a fun hike. I did see you posted pictures and you posted some video, if I recall correctly. Yep. It looks gorgeous. I'm trying to remember, when did you say this was built again?
From 1899 to 1901.
So that's how long. So it took a couple years to build it.
Yeah.
So I'm picturing big arches where the windows are, brick and arches and flying buttresses and all those other fancy things that I miss from building construction. One thing I wouldn't say I'm an expert on building construction by any means, but I like a certain period of building construction when they had arches and things like that, they just, it wasn't just nowadays if they built it'd be a big square building and it would have,
so boring.
It'd have no character to it. It'd have all the character of a piece of cardboard or something.
And I totally get that that's done to save costs and such, but I do miss the way things were built back then. Because even the interior of the roof or the ceiling was the same that they used to use in the subways, because they look the same. I was like, oh, and it just looks really cool.
Like big arches and stuff like that. Yeah, a day when, you had more craftsmen who were building stuff as opposed to, and again, I'm not, if you're a person who builds building now, don't yell at me. I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying difference in what people expect things to look like now as opposed to when they did then. And some of that stuff was built because they were building brick and they maybe didn't have reinforced concrete like we do now. So they had to build arches because they could, build them with, you know what I'm saying?
That makes sense, yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm describing it well, but it sounds like a pretty cool place. I need to get down there to visit. I may have to wait till about a year from now before I can get down there, because I'm going to be doing some traveling again. Imagine that.
Weird.
Yeah, I know. So I'm glad you got to do it. It's been on my bucket list forever, but when I'm looking at stuff to do, and you know me, I don't plan things, so it's like, what am I doing today? Well, it's way too late to think of a trip like that.
Like you had mentioned earlier, it was the same for me, where it's been on my bucket list for a long time, very, very long time, and I just could never get around to it. So when my friend was like, hey, have you heard of the Skagway Powerplant? I was like, yes, I've read a lot about it. And she's like, oh, me and so-and-so are going, so you want to join? I was like, yes, I would love to. So it's like, awesome. And a hike like that with the route finding and exploring and stuff, I found to be much better experience going with friends, because there are a bunch of times I just did not see a marker. There's an area where people did make a good effort to put the little ribbons in the trees and cairns and such. So that part was nice, because it's like, okay, marker, let's go that way. Another one. But there were a few times where I just didn't see them. But my two friends who were like further back would be like, oh, it's over there. It's like, oh, cool. Okay.
There's a different elevation. They could see over your head and see over something. Yeah, that happens a lot. Well, cool. Well, I'm glad you got to do it. Sounds like a fun trip. A fun hike. I'm guessing you were like 8 hours, 9 hours altogether on this thing.
I think it was it was close to 7.5, 8 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Including stops and everything.
Yep.
That's not bad. Not bad for an 11-mile hike with that level of difficulty, and then stopping to look at stuff. When I did the Dome Rock Loop the other day, like I said, it was about 11, just under 12 miles, and it was 5 hours of moving time. But some of that was also looking for the War Party Trail that I knew was here someplace, but I found it. And I'll be probably featuring that in a column coming up here pretty soon. A little bit of wayfinding there. And then the first couple of miles is a lot of uphill. So you slow down a bit. Well, Kevin, that's great. A fun report. It sounded like a blast of a hike. Your pictures were wonderful.
It's a very unique hike, too.
Yeah,
so.
Very unique. Sounded like a lot of fun.
Thank you for letting me tell the whole story.
And for people who listened last week, this is why I waited, because we were going to try and squeeze it in last week, but I knew it was going to be kind of long, and I didn't want to make an obscenely long podcast and they want everybody to listen to one whole thing, then listen to another whole thing. I thought it deserved its own show. So that's why we waited another week to put it on. And I'm glad we did, because now we have plenty of time to talk about it and stuff like that. Do you have anything planned?
I'm taking the last week of October off for my birthday, so I want to do a few smaller hikes, but I'm thinking about doing a huge hike on my birthday.
Okay.
I'm not really sure what yet.
Okay. You can do the Dixon Trail.
I feel like I just did that. So. Wait, I did.
Well, it's 14 miles, so you haven't quite done that much.
It's not bad.
Yeah, so you can do that. Okay, well, Kevin, thanks for telling us that story. And
sounds good.
anyway, with that, Kevin, I think we'll say goodbye.
Okay, we'll talk to you later.
Okay, everybody, thanks for listening to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast.
Before you go, did you know you can rate and review our Studio 809 podcasts? That will help us, because our egos really need to have thousands and thousands of listeners. But that helps our wonderful sponsors reach more ears too. And we do love our sponsors. So just go to Studio 809 or any individual 809 podcast in your iTunes or podcast app and click on ratings and reviews. Thanks.